Goodfellas, 1990. Ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to be a gangster. To me, being a gangster was better than being president of the United States. That opening line from Goodfellas, spoken by Henry Hill, played by Ray Liotta, is enough to pull the audience right in. Goodfellas, 1990, directed by Martin Scorsese, is a masterpiece of the crime genre, offering a raw, unfiltered look at the criminal underworld in America. Based on the non-fiction book Wise Guy by Nicholas Pileggi, the film stars Ray Liotta as Henry Hill, a young man who gets drawn deep into the mafia. The story follows Henry's rise through the ranks of the Lucchese crime family, portraying both the allure and the danger of a life built on crime, loyalty, and betrayal. Martin Scorsese masterfully blends drama with dark humor, creating a gripping, highly watchable experience from start to finish. The film is famous for its inventive storytelling techniques, including voiceover narration and energetic editing, which heighten the tension and make the dramatic moments even more impactful. Under Scorsese's direction is an outstanding cast, with Robert De Niro as the charismatic Jimmy Conway and Joe Pesci, who won an Oscar, as the explosive Tommy DeVito. The film's cinematography, with its vivid colors and striking compositions, authentically recreates New York in the 1970s and 1980s. On top of that, the soundtrack, packed with classic rock and pop, amplifies the mood and emotional punch of the movie. Goodfellas remains a celebrated cinematic achievement because of its realistic depiction of mafia life and its deep exploration of morality, ambition, and the consequences of the choices people make in pursuit of the American dream. Goodfellas, 1990. Who was Henry Hill, the unpredictable gangster immortalized in the film? The real story of Henry Hill, a gangster who later became an informant, is even crazier than what the 1990 movie was able to show. The film received both critical and commercial acclaim and was nominated for 6 Oscars. At the same time, Henry Hill became a widely recognized figure thanks to the movie's success. However, it seems he was never able to fully abandon his criminal lifestyle. In his later years, he was arrested multiple times and was eventually expelled from the Witness Protection Program because he kept revealing his real identity and because he continued engaging in illegal activities. Henry Hill enters the criminal life. Henry Hill Jr. was born on June 11, 1943, in New York City. He grew up in a working-class family in the Brownsville section of Brooklyn. His father, Henry Hill Sr., was an electrician, and his mother, Carmela Costa Hill, was a Sicilian-American housewife. As Henry Jr. later recounted in Wise Guy, his father was a hard-working man who believed children should learn the value of money by earning it themselves. Henry Jr., who had 7 siblings, said his father immigrated to the United States at age 12 and that strong work ethic was instilled in the whole family. Naturally, Henry Sr. hoped his son would find a decent job, but fate had other plans. Although in Goodfellas, Henry Hill says, "As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster." In real life, Hill later said, "Actually, I wanted to be a priest." But that didn't work out. Eventually, Hill became curious about the mafiosi who frequented the taxi stand and pizza place near his home, including Paul Vario of the Lucchese crime family, and about the respect they commanded in the neighborhood. In 1955, when he was around 12, young Henry approached the men at the taxi stand and asked for a part-time job. Henry Hill's early involvement with the mafia. It wasn't long before Henry Hill was running errands for all sorts of Paul Vario's regulars. Even though Hill knew what they were doing was criminal, he admired Vario and the other Lucchese guys, especially when they showed up in expensive suits and coats. During this period, teenage Henry met several mobsters who would later become very important in his life, most notably Jimmy Burke, who would go on to mastermind the infamous Lufthansa heist. By age 14, Hill had landed a legit construction job through the Varios. He was only getting a portion of his pay, but it was enough to convince him to drop out of school, according to the Telegraph. Of course, Hill didn't tell his parents. While working for the Varios, Hill lied to his parents and said he was going to school every day. In reality, he hadn't gone for months. When Henry Sr. received a truancy notice from the school, he beat Henry Jr. so badly that the mob guys at the taxi stand wanted to know what had happened. To make sure that never happened again, they kidnapped the mailman, took him to the local pizzeria, and told him to deliver all of Henry's school mail there instead of to the Hill home. From that day on, no more school letters arrived at Henry's house. Henry Hill, the real-life figure behind the famous crime film Goodfellas, once led a crew that robbed the home of cosmetics queen Estee Lauder. And in the middle of that robbery, something no one would expect happened. A romance began. A soon-to-be published book in the U.S. attracted media attention because it promised to reveal this unusual love story after decades. The book tells of a notorious mafia crew that carried out high-level robberies across America, a crew that included Henry Hill, whose life has become legendary. Hill's life became especially remarkable because he later flipped and became an informant for the FBI. His story inspired multiple works of nonfiction and fiction, most famously Martin Scorsese's 1990 film Goodfellas. By that time, Henry Hill was already deeply involved with the Lucchese crime family and was steadily moving up the criminal ladder. Henry Hill's brief time in the Army. In 1960, Henry Hill suddenly decided to join the U.S. Army and served for 3 years. This decision came soon after the infamous 1957 Appalachian meeting, a mafia summit that was raided by police. More than 60 mobsters were arrested, and the authorities eventually released a list of 5,000 suspected associates. The list didn't name Paul Vario, but Hill still thought it was a good idea to leave town for a while until things cooled down. Of course, old habits die hard. Even while enlisted, Hill stayed in touch with mob members. He even ran side hustles with fellow soldiers, secretly selling tax-free cigarettes and loan sharking to some of them. Near the end of his service, he was reprimanded for getting into a fight and for impulsively stealing a local sheriff's car. He was discharged in 1963 and returned to New York, and immediately went back to working with the Lucchese family. The criminal life and double game of Henry Hill are no secret to fans of mafia stories, but the upcoming book promises to reveal one surprising episode: a romance between Henry Hill and a woman whose house he once robbed. On that occasion, Hill led his men to rob the private residence of cosmetics innovator Estee Lauder, stealing more than $1 million from her. Incredibly, amid the chaos of the robbery, Henry Hill and the victim, Estee Lauder, sparked a strange kind of connection. Seeing how terrified she was, Hill offered to take her out for coffee while his crew finished cleaning out the house. According to Hill's own account, writer Daniel Simone turned this and other stories into The Lufthansa Heist, a book that promised to fascinate readers. A rising criminal career. By the time Henry Hill met his future wife, Karen Friedman, in 1965 through Vario, he was already moving into more serious crimes: arson, hijacking trucks, assault, credit card scams, and extortion. Although Hill wasn't fully Italian, which meant he could never become a made man, the Vario crew knew he was useful. Paul Vario himself treated Hill like family, so Hill was eventually brought into higher-level operations, including the April 1967 Air France cargo heist at JFK Airport with Tommy DeSimone. It was a clean job, no alarms, no guns, and they walked away with $420,000. As Hill later said, "Air France made me. Nobody had ever pulled that much money out of an airport, and I did it without a gun." Hiding bodies and selling drugs. Henry Hill claimed he never personally killed anyone during his time with the mob. However, he witnessed several brutal mob executions, including the unauthorized 1970 murder of Billy Batts. As dramatized in Goodfellas, Batts insulted Tommy DeSimone by asking if he was still shining shoes, even though it happened at Batts' welcome home party after he got out of prison. DeSimone was so enraged that he swore to kill him, and 2 weeks later, he did. At a mob bar, DeSimone and Jimmy Burke beat and pistol-whipped Batts nearly to death, then asked Hill to help dispose of the body. As Hill later admitted, "I dug a lot of holes." On their way north, they realized Batts was still alive in the trunk. While Goodfellas shows them shooting him, Hill said the real death was even worse. They just stabbed him 30 or 40 times. It was awful. This violence eventually led to serious prison time for Hill. In 1972, he and 4 others were arrested for assaulting a bar owner named Gaspar Ciaccio and threatening a doctor named Felix Locherco over gambling debts. Hill and his associates were convicted of extortion, and Hill was sentenced to 10 years. He ended up serving about 4.5 before being paroled. Even in prison, he learned he could keep doing business. He started selling drugs behind bars. Drug dealing turned out to be profitable, and even more so when he got out. Before long, both Hill and his wife were using some of the drugs they were selling, especially cocaine. Their home life became a blur of drug-fueled parties, sex, and chaos, sometimes even involving people who would offer drugs to Hill's children. The Lufthansa heist and deadly fallout. In 1978, Henry Hill was part of another major mafia score, the Lufthansa heist, a robbery that almost brought down the entire Vario crew. Though only briefly mentioned in Goodfellas, the Lufthansa heist was a major turning point. It took place at the Lufthansa cargo terminal at JFK on December 11th, 1978. Organized by Jimmy Burke, the robbery took only 64 minutes and netted $5 million in untraceable cash and $1 million in jewelry. But the plan unraveled when Parnell Stacks Edwards, a Lucchese associate, made a fatal mistake. Instead of getting rid of the getaway van, he left it parked in a no-parking zone outside his girlfriend's apartment for 2 days. Police quickly found the van and recovered fingerprints, sending Burke into panic mode. Soon, Vario ordered DeSimone to take Edwards out, and several others tied to the heist were also murdered. But Burke couldn't outrun the law forever, and a lot of that was because of Hill. What happened after Henry Hill became an FBI informant? In 1980, Henry Hill was arrested on drug charges and soon realized the mafia might want him dead. Paul Vario didn't want anyone in his crew involved with narcotics, and Jimmy Burke seemed more determined than ever to eliminate anyone tied to Lufthansa. Investigators then played Hill a recorded conversation between Burke and Vario, in which Burke said Hill had to be whacked. Seeing no other way out, Hill agreed to testify against his former associates in exchange for his freedom. His testimony helped convict about 50 former mob associates, including Vario and Burke. Authorities were never able to prove Burke's role in the Lufthansa heist, and even when Bonanno mobster Vincent Asaro was later charged, he was acquitted. After Hill flipped, he and his family entered the Witness Protection Program, living under new names in various locations. Amazingly, Hill initially asked if his 2 girlfriends could be placed in the program too. Even with the chance to start over, Hill never fully left his old life. He agreed to tell his story to crime journalist Nicholas Pileggi, who wrote the 1985 book Wise Guy, based on interviews with Hill, the very book that inspired Scorsese's Goodfellas in 1990 and made Hill a household name. In the end, Hill was kicked out of witness protection because he kept revealing his identity and because of multiple arrests, including a 1987 cocaine-related charge. 2 years later, Karen Friedman Hill and Henry Hill separated in 1989, though they didn't officially divorce until 2002. According to the New York Times, Hill later faced more arrests, including one in 2005 for attempted meth possession, and another later that year after he allegedly threatened his second wife, Kelly, and another man with a knife. Still, he avoided long prison sentences. Though he was never completely rehabilitated, Hill remained a minor celebrity in his later years thanks to Goodfellas. And because most of the mobsters he testified against were dead or in prison, he was never whacked. Henry Hill died relatively peacefully on June 12, 2012, the day after his birthday, from heart problems.